Good afternoon and welcome to video chapter number 11, the history of the BBC, 1922 to 1995. And you can see behind me one of the most well-known of the idents used by the BBC over the years. This is BBC One, because, of course, they change their logos regularly. I was taking you through the chronology, the timeline of the BBC, and I was just getting to the end of the 1950s. And for the 1960s and 70s, I'm going to present a certain number of renowned programs, if you like. And this is not just to praise the BBC, but it's to try to get a grasp on what we can do with the programs as to help us have a vision of the history of broadcasting in the United Kingdom. Because, of course, although it's very easy for the BBC or the government to say we want a public service channel which educates, which informs, and which entertains, the actual details of what that means can be extremely various on the ground, and certainly people do not come home in the evening and say, well, do I want to be informed or educated or entertained today? And indeed, in each of these three ideas is much more complex than you think. And the final point is, of course, there's nothing monolithic. There's very little monolithic about the BBC. What the BBC does is open up a space where creative teams can produce extremely good new educational forward-looking programs, or can produce rather reactionary or regressive programs. So moving into 1958, so first of all, 1958, from a political point of view, was marked by the fighting in Notting Hill in the summer. I think what was particular about this, it was symbolic more than absolutely different, is that it was a time when a large number of young West Indian men in London fought back against the white racists, sometimes teddy boys, who used to attack them in the streets. And so you actually had fighting in the streets around the question of racism. And this meant that the question of racism, and people often didn't even use the word at the time, or perhaps they might say racialism. This question of multiculturalism and living together with different people came onto the front pages of the newspapers. 1958 is also the time of the major reform of the House of Lords, and also the time when the BBC introduced its new logo, which you can see on the slide here, BBC, in these black squares. Now, this was the year of the production of a series of radio programs, which I wanted to mention as perhaps a symbolic events. And these are called the Radio Ballads, and they were put together by Ewan MacColl, folk singer, close to the Communist Party. I can't remember if he was a member of the Communist Party. Peggy Seeger, an American folk singer, and Charles Parker, a writer. These radio ballads were an attempt to bring folk music into touch with modern day social questions. And so there were a series of them. This one was about teenagers in England and Scotland. These three about The Song of a Road was about the workers who built the first motorway in Britain, the M1. And what Ewan MacColl and the team did is they went out and they interviewed people who worked on the road, very hard work, very often immigrants, Irish immigrants in particular, building the road. And they talked to them about what they liked and disliked about the life building the road, and Ewan MacColl and the others wrote songs about their lives. And so this is obviously somewhat politically committed, the idea that the songs and the radio ballads should be about ordinary people's lives. We don't want to just listen to experts and just see films about the royal family. So this is an attempt at socially committed radio programs. Personally, I think they're of a very high quality. And this is one example of where the BBC left a space for radical content, which I think it's fairly easy to argue would be much more difficult in a commercial in a commercial context. This is not absolutely true. As you know, commercial companies like Netflix, for example, sometimes produce produce or distribute politically committed programs. But many people argue that public service makes it easier to do this. So these are the radio ballads. On the other hand, the BBC also left space to produce programmes which were certainly not in any way progressive, and for many years, despite the protests about the racism in the show, the black and white minstrel show continued for 20 years, beginning in 1958. That's why I'm talking about it now. It continued for 20 years. Based on a 19th century tradition where white people, and in particular white men, disguised themselves as stereotypes of black slaves. In the original 19th century version, and even later, this involved talking as if you were very stupid. In the television show, the worst racist sides of it were reduced somewhat, but it remained very much a racist show and continued for many years despite the protests. 1958 is also the year when this children's program was put together, Blue Peter, which lasted from 1958 until today. So it's still going on today. 5,134 episodes to date. Very interesting program. That's the Blue Peter is supposed to be an imaginary ship. In which the children are. I think, if I remember correctly, the program lasts about half an hour in the early evening. And these are the first presenters, and as you can see, this is a man with a tie on. So this is the 1950s, and this will become much less the case. And by the end of the 60s and 70s, there's no ties; it's jumpers. And this it's partly an educational program. There will be interviews with people, very often working with animals, or little bits of news, little bits of games. Very much a sort of children's program. I'm not quite sure what the exact age range is meant to be. Certainly around 10, 12 years old, something like that. So what was happening is that the BBC were thinking, what is the right kind of program for pre-teenagers? What is it that public service broadcasting can present to these people to have fun, but also educate them to being good citizens, educate them to think about the world around them. Again, this is perhaps something particularly suitable for public service broadcasting. 5,134 episodes to date. I'm going to particularly present those programs which lasted many, many, many years in Britain, which is one of the characteristics of the BBC, to have very, very long-running programs, although the longest-running television program in Britain is a commercial television program, Coronation Street. Moving on to 1959, we have new elections, but it is the Conservatives who win again, and it is Harold Macmillan who becomes the Prime Minister. And 1959 is notable for a couple of programs which have become renowned. Firstly, Jukebox Jury. So Jukebox Jury is a pop music program. A popular music program, and what happens is the jury have to listen to a new song that's just come out, and they have to vote, will this be a hit or will it be a flop? And notice again, they're sitting there with their ties. And one of the interesting things about this was one of the early attempts to put popular music, to pop music, the new young people's pop music on the television, and it attracted both the young people who wanted to see their music on television, which is a sort of form of valorization of music, to see it on the BBC. But it also attracted their parents, who were happy with the rather cynical comments which the jury often made. I say more about this in the chapter which I wrote in a recent book edited by Georges Fournier. You can find most of the programs I mentioned. You can find 1 or 2 episodes on YouTube, and I do recommend this. Although, of course, if you're part of those, if you're one of those who's studying for the agrégation on the BBC this year, then you won't have a lot of time. But even to watch 5 minutes of each kind of program really gives you a feeling for what they are trying to do. So this it's a creative team who creates this. It's not the government or the management of the BBC, but they need to create something which, when the management looks to see what's going on, does not shock them or does not create opposition in any way. So the 1960s come into view, and the 1960, one of the key political moments is the speech of Harold Macmillan, given in South Africa, well known under the title of the Winds of Change speech, and he gives a speech to the all-white South African Parliament, and with extreme courtesy, he explains to them that African nationalism, black nationalism, is not going to disappear, and that the Western world and the white South Africans ought to accept the idea that one person, one vote should be instituted across Africa, and that colonialism is on its way out. And this is a very significant, symbolic moment when a conservative prime minister says, well, you know, really the future of Africa is black nationalism. This is also the year of the end of compulsory military service in the UK. That has a certain importance because I suspect that the vibrant youth culture of the 1960s in Britain, in particular in popular music, was partly helped by the fact that young men did not have to go off to the army. This is also the year, a symbolic event in 1960. This was the year of the Lady Chatterley's Lover trial. Lady Chatterley's Lover, then a novel written in the 20s by D.H. Lawrence, I think it was the 20s around then, which could not be published in Britain, was published in Italy at the beginning because of the erotic scenes in it, and the version you could buy in Britain for many years had some of it missing. In any case, in 1960, the full version was published, and there was a court case. There was a tribunal set up to say, is this obscene, or is this literature, or is this obscene? And the publishers won, and so they were allowed to publish it. And this is mostly symbolic, but it's certainly a sign where gradually it was seen as a turning point towards a more relaxed attitude to public discussions about sex. 1960, also the moment that the current affairs program Tonight is established on the BBC and has up to 9 million regular viewers. And it's an important point that in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, it was possible to get huge television audiences because there were only 2 or 3 channels. Nobody was watching a video because there were no videos. Nobody was watching a DVD because there were no DVDs. And of course, nobody was on Netflix or cable television, satellite television, etc. And so you could have a huge television audience. There's a 9 million for a current affairs program, even more for the drama programs. And this meant that it had even more influence than the media today. I think we're still in 1960. Yes, in 1960 is also the moment when Nan Winstone becomes the first national female newsreader. And I think I've mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning again. This symbolic moment when the person who tells us what's happening in the world and how to interpret it is not always a man. In fact, she didn't last very long, and it was some years before there was a second one. But nevertheless, she was the symbolic first one. And this is also the moment of the nomination of the new Director General, Sir Hugh Green, who I've already spoken about. And then almost immediately the appointment of the Committee of Inquiry into Broadcasting, the Pilkington Committee, again, which I've already spoken about. And in the early videos in the series, there are, I think, 3 on the Director Generals throughout the years, and then 3 on the Commissions of Inquiry throughout the years. And that's before I got into the present series, where I'm going through more or less chronologically what was going on. An important event from 1961 the following year, an important event from 1961, is the setting up of a daily news programme on the BBC in the Welsh language, entitled Heddiw. I'm not sure about my pronunciation there. And there you can see then an example of the listings from the early 60s. But it was in 61 it was first set up. And this daily news programme in Welsh was broadcast from 1961 until 1982, when an all-Welsh language channel was set up. And certainly the existence of this daily news programme in Welsh greatly encouraged those who were working to halt the numerical decline of the Welsh language. Indeed, in 1911, 43% of people in Wales spoke Welsh. In 1961, 26%. And in 2011, 19%. So this is interesting because the BBC Public Service Broadcasting actually could make a tremendous difference, in particular to Welsh identity, Welsh nationalism also, and Welsh culture, in the sense that if you have a minority language that you're trying to keep vibrant, and you've got a quarter of the population speaking it, and of course especially older people, then a television program and later a television channel is a tremendous advantage. And in our latest issue of the French Journal of British Studies, La Revue Française de Civilisation Britannique, on the BBC, Stéphanie Bory writes a whole article about the effect on Welsh identity of BBC broadcasting in Welsh, and she looks at the idea that Welsh identity would have been very severely damaged if they had not managed to get onto this broadcasting space. 1962 goes into view, and I just wanted to show you this wonderful advert. You can't tell me about TV. I've got a Philco. Very gradually, the televisions the technology of the television sets is getting better. More and more people are getting them. This is the time of the boom. The late 50s, the early 60s is the time of the boom. When I was at school in the mid 60s, half the children had a television in primary school. And you can see that of course there's still a long way to go. They're quite very, very heavy things. They often break down. You need the technician round every few months, and of course you don't have a remote control or anything like that. 1962 is known for the year when a tremendously popular sitcom was brought out. This is Steptoe and Son, which lasted for 12 years from 1962 to 1974, and was the life of a rather run-down part of London and a family within it. The father, there you can see him on the left, was in a rag and bone business. You don't really see these around anymore. Rag and bone business is they going around houses asking for things people do not want anymore, clothes or machines or furniture. And remember, at the time, if people didn't want them anymore, they were really in bad shape. People were much less likely to just change them because they wanted a new one than they are today. Yes, and so that's the rag and bone business. Very often they went around the streets with a horse and cart. And they live in London, and the sitcom is about the conflict between the father and son. The father, who is not very clean and very keen on money, and the son, who is very keen to become someone in the world and move up into the middle class, or if he can't move up into the middle class, at least pretend he has. Now, it's quite difficult to discuss. There are so many sitcoms in British television and on the BBC that it's quite difficult to discuss in an analytical and general way what they do, but certainly one very common point is to get people to laugh about things which are worrying. That is the question of status. How much am I respected by the neighbours or by society? And the whole question of class hierarchy is something which is tremendously important to people, and perhaps even more important in the 60s and 70s. And laughing about questions which are worrying us is a central aim of comedy. In June of this year, in June of 1962, the Pilkington Report was published. I've already spoken about this in a previous video, but the most important results was that the third national television channel should be awarded to the BBC, and also the BBC should establish local radio stations. The Pilkington Report went against the idea that competition would be a good thing. They said, no, competition would weaken the BBC's ability to fulfill its public service responsibilities. And so obviously the BBC was very, very pleased with this result, and this allowed them to begin preparing for BBC Two, which began broadcasting in 1964. Independent television, commercial television, was obviously very unhappy with the Pilkington Report and tried to fight back politically, criticising in the press, criticising the Pilkington Report for being old-fashioned and elitist, and demanding that television should respect the taste of the audience. So this is this big debate with elements of the BBC tending to say that, what you need to do is produce programs which are in good taste and of good standard of education and information, and educate the population so that they come to like them. And the ITV saying, no, we'll just give people what they like. Now, of course, both channels, in fact, end up doing a bit of both, but the balance is not the same. And so after Pilkington, ITV makes a real effort to produce more sophisticated documentaries and more sophisticated fiction as well. And one of the examples is the World at War commercial television series in 1973. So Pilkington then very, very favourable to the BBC. Now, this was a very difficult moment of competition for the BBC because, first of all, commercial television had much more money. And indeed, this much more money, because they have the advertising revenues, which were huge, and this much more money was symbolised by the fact that when they did quiz shows on ITV, the winners earned much more money than if they did a quiz show on the BBC. And the second inequality in this competition between the BBC and commercial television is that the BBC had to be very careful because every 10 years, the BBC charter was renewed, or maybe not. Now, in fact, as we know, it was always renewed, but the BBC had to be very careful not to step out, not to fail to fulfill its responsibilities as a public service, because it could find itself abolished or obliged to introduce advertising or something. Whereas it was rather difficult to imagine once commercial TV was established. I don't think any government was tempted to abolish it again. Nevertheless, it's important to remember that commercial television was not completely free. They had to follow detailed instructions, which meant that although it was commercial television, it maintained an element of public service. Because it was obliged to reduce the amount of advertising and follow a certain number of rules about the programs that they put out. The competition between the BBC and the ITV in the world of information and education, if you like, is perhaps symbolised by the competition between these two documentary series. World in Action every week on ITV, on commercial television, from 1963 until 1988, 25 years every week, trying to do quality reporting about big issues. I think if you're thinking of France, you might think of something along the lines of Envoyé Spécial, although the style is very, very different. And on the BBC Panorama, every week from 1953 until 2016, so more than 60 years. And these programs, occasionally Panorama would produce a documentary which would make the government very unhappy, and we will see some examples in the 1980s. But in general, it was a tremendously interesting and educational weekly program about big issues. Now, it could be about social issues, it could be about strikes, it could be about sexuality, it could be about the Cold War, it could be about a huge number of different topics. This is also the year 1962, where for the first time radio broadcasts were available in stereo, but only experimentally. They only did their experiments on stereo radio. This will be tremendously important because stereo music on the radio is one of the things which helps radio not to disappear when television comes along. So as 1963 comes into view, Harold Wilson becomes the leader of the Labour Party. The decolonizations continue in Africa, with Kenya getting its independence after some very violent repression. Charles de Gaulle vetoes the entry of the United Kingdom into the European Economic Community. And we see the opening of the BBC Two. And BBC Two has as an objective to carry more educational and cultural material than the other two channels. This is also the time when, for the first time, the logo that you can see behind me was introduced. The globe logo. The globe actually turns. It should be said. In November, the first ever episode of Doctor Who, again, 1963 to 2021. There's a real determination to get programs to last a long time in Britain. So this is a science fiction one. There have been a whole number of different doctors, most recently a woman doctor for the first time in 2017. And I can't remember the name of this one, but 862 episodes so far. And there are people who are completely obsessed with it. You can find Facebook pages, especially for Doctor Who fans. So what can we see in this? Well, this is it's a time machine. The TARDIS is a time machine, and the Doctor and his assistant go back in time, or occasionally forward in time, I think, and find themselves intervening in a myriad of different situations. So this is the world's longest running science fiction series. Again, this is mostly entertainment, but nevertheless you will see Doctor Who going back into particular historical situations where people who are watching it may learn about it. 1964 is the last time in Britain that a criminal was executed by hanging. So the capital punishment was abolished, first of all, temporarily, but it was never brought back in. And after 13 years of Conservative rule, Harold Wilson's Labour government is voted in. And also in 1964, then the presence of the Wednesday play series, a series of rather serious plays written for television. In fact, this is a category that I don't think exists anymore. The reason they didn't call them films, they called them plays, was that they were supposed to be more serious. And a whole series of Wednesday plays, many of them you can watch on YouTube, were put out by the BBC over these 6 years, and then there was a follow-up series in the 70s. And they included works by Dennis Potter and by Ken Loach. And so they gained a reputation as being about important social questions. For example, there was one about abortion, which was still illegal at this time. And they could sometimes get audiences of 10 million, 15 million or more. And so obviously there were important social and political interventions. So, of course, they are entertainment. These are exciting stories, love stories, murder stories, difficult people in difficult situations. But they're also exploring genuinely complex and difficult issues and intervening in the public debate. And so we can see that the BBC left this space which the team of the Wednesday play moved into because they had things to say. Although sometimes the team that produced the Wednesday play had to be rather clever, and they made sure that the bosses didn't know everything about the program, just in case they might censor it or make them cut part of it, which occasionally happened. The other thing about this is that defenders of the BBC very often talk about the Wednesday play to show the great quality that the BBC has been able to put out and the great quality of radical programming, of radical social programming. However, it does seem that since the 1970s, it never happened again. That it seems to have been in some ways an exceptional moment and not necessarily something which is permanently true of the BBC. Another sitcom, The Likely Lads, 64 to 66. Again, this is about working class. This is about two working class men in Newcastle, so regional people and regional accents and so on. And they're in their early 20s. And again, it's a humorous program, of course, but again, the question of class is very central here. One of the two is very cynical and working class in culture, whereas the other is hoping to move into the middle class. And so it almost seems like this is a bit of a national obsession, because it appears in so many sitcoms have an important element of who's working class, who's middle class, and so on and so forth. The other great program from 1964 is Top of the Pops, so a pop music program, completely different from the previous one I mentioned, Jukebox Jury. Top of the Pops is like you're invited to a party, and there is a studio audience who dance, although they're very quiet and sedate about their dancing, and you have a series of groups singing their top hit, their single, which is at number 2 this week or at number 7 this week, and so on. It was a tremendous institution, remaining then in production from 1964 till 2016, more than 2,000 episodes, and it seems that it was only killed off with YouTube and Spotify, when you could perhaps in 2016 you could no longer guarantee that young people would say, oh, it's Thursday night, it's 7 o'clock, I need to be home, I can't go anywhere else because Top of the Pops was on. And this was a tremendous institution. I do recommend you find 1 or 2 episodes to watch a little bit of on YouTube. And the very last example I'm going to give today is another 1964 program, 1964 to 88. I'm showing you, of course, more of the programs which last decades and decades. And this is for preschool children. It's for play school, so it's probably for 3 to 6 year olds. And it's little games, but also very short documentaries about the zoo or about particular elements of public life, and every time they saw a little a short documentary, it was through the arch window or through the square window or through the round window, and there you have the 2 characters, Humpty Dumpty and Jemima, if I remember correct. So why am I showing you this? Well, this is still early days. The BBC has a team who are thinking, well, what is the right thing to put on television for 3-year-olds? Nobody's ever done this. It's completely new. So what should we do to do something which is fun, but also educational? That has a certain educational side to it. Definitely, Play School definitely has a certain educational side to it. So there we are, somewhere in the middle of 1964, and I'm going to stop for today. There will be more soon. Thank you for listening.